I'm Helen, 38 female. I live alone in a quiet suburban condo that I bought with 2 decades of relentless work. I'm a senior project manager at a major engineering firm, and my job is to make sure complex, multi-million-dollar projects run on time and on budget. For most of my adult life, however, that was only my day job. My real, all-consuming project was my family. I was the unofficial CEO of my 2 younger siblings, Noah and Laura, a position that came with no salary, no vacation time, and absolutely no gratitude. This is the story of my resignation. It wasn't a quiet 2 weeks' notice. It was a hostile takeover of my own life, sparked by a single, brutal conversation that revealed the people I had sacrificed everything for saw me not as a sister, but as a service provider whose contract had just expired. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. My tenure as the family CEO began when I was 18. Our mother passed away suddenly, and our father, a kind but emotionally fragile man, simply retreated into himself. He continued to go to his accounting job, but the light in his eyes went out. He was physically present but emotionally absent, leaving a power vacuum in a household with a 12-year-old boy and a 6-year-old girl. I was about to leave for college with a hefty scholarship, my ticket to a new life. But one look at Noah's forced bravery and Laura's tear-streaked face, and I knew I couldn't go. I stayed. That decision was the first of thousands of sacrifices. I forfeited the scholarship, enrolled in a local community college, and got a part-time job as a waitress to help with the bills our father was now neglecting. My earnings went straight into the house account. I paid for Laura's dance lessons, Noah's soccer cleats, and the groceries our father forgot to buy. I became the one who checked their homework, attended parent-teacher conferences, and woke up in the middle of the night when they were sick. My father provided the roof over our heads, but I provided the home. My own youth dissolved into a series of responsibilities. My friends went to parties. I learned how to balance a household budget. They worried about exams. I worried about the electricity being shut off. When our father died of a stroke 5 years later, the transition was seamless because I was already in charge. He left behind a modest life insurance policy that barely covered his funeral and the remaining mortgage. At 23, I was an orphan and the sole guardian of a teenager and a preteen. I doubled down. I worked full-time during the day, took online courses at night to finish my degree in business management, and freelanced as a bookkeeper on weekends. Sleep was a luxury. As the years went by, I fought my way up the corporate ladder. With every promotion and salary increase, I felt a sense of relief, thinking, good, now we'll be more comfortable. But the goalposts always moved. My financial success wasn't seen as my own. It was treated as the family's collective resource pool, and I was merely the manager. Noah, now 32, decided to become a freelance graphic designer. He was talented, but he lacked the discipline to build a steady client base. He saw networking as begging and deadlines as suggestions. As a result, his income was wildly inconsistent. Yet, he insisted on living in a trendy, expensive apartment downtown because he needed to be close to the creative scene. I subsidized his rent every single month. It started as a few $100s, a loan to get him through a tough patch. It soon became a permanent, expected line item in my budget. On top of that came the panicked calls for a new high-end laptop because his was too slow for his rendering software, or for the subscription fees to expensive design programs. I paid for it all, telling myself I was supporting his artistic career. Laura, who is now 26, took a different approach to draining my resources. She worked as a retail associate in a chic downtown boutique, a job that gave her a taste for luxury she couldn't afford on her own salary. She had impeccable taste, and she believed she was entitled to a life that matched it. My credit card became her personal expense account. It was for brunch with friends at Instagram-worthy cafes, weekend trips she'd post about online with the hashtag blessed, and a wardrobe that was constantly being refreshed. She'd send me a link to a designer handbag with the text, "OMG, isn't this to die for?" It would be perfect for that wedding we have next month. The we was rhetorical. She knew I wouldn't go because I'd be working. But she also knew I'd buy the bag. I justified it by telling myself I was helping her build a life and an image that made her happy. My best friend Rachel was the only one who saw the red flags. Rachel, a TH. A rapist, had a professional knack for seeing dysfunctional dynamics. "Helen, you've enabled them," she told me gently during one of our weekly dinners. "You're not their sister or a parental figure anymore. You're their grant foundation. There's no relationship there, it's a transaction." I always brushed her off. "It's just until they get on their feet, Ratch. They just need a little more time." But how much time was enough? Noah was in his 30s and Laura was well into her 20s. They were on their feet. They were just standing firmly on my shoulders. I was so busy managing their lives, paying their bills, solving their crises, funding their dreams, that I had completely forgotten to build a life of my own. I hadn't taken a real vacation in over 10 years. My dating life was non-existent. My condo, which I had been so proud of, felt less like a home and more like the corporate headquarters of a very unprofitable family business. I was the CEO, the CFO, and the entire workforce, and I was beginning to suspect I was headed for a complete and total burnout. The first cracks in the foundation were beginning to show, but I had no idea that a single dinner was about to bring the entire structure crashing down around me. The catalyst for the implosion was, ironically, a celebration for me, my 38th birthday. I wasn't one for big parties. All I wanted was a quiet dinner with the two people who were supposed to be my closest family. I made a reservation at a nice Italian restaurant, one of my favorites, a place I usually only went to for client meetings. For once, I wanted to be the one who was celebrated. I told Noah and Laura a month in advance, reminding them via text a week before. I even specified that this was my treat, as always, but that their presence was the only gift I needed. I arrived at the restaurant a few minutes early, a habit ingrained from years of managing project timelines. I chose a quiet booth and ordered a glass of wine, a small indulgence. I felt a rare flicker of optimistic anticipation. Maybe tonight would be different. Maybe they'd ask me about my work, my life, my hopes. Maybe we could just be three siblings enjoying a meal together. Laura arrived first, 20 minutes late, tapping away at her phone as she slid into the booth. "Sorry," she said, not looking up. "The traffic was insane, and I had to get the perfect shot of the sunset for my story." She didn't say happy birthday. She immediately picked up the menu, her eyes scanning the prices. "Ooh, they have the burrata, I'm definitely getting that, and the lobster ravioli." Noah ambled in another 10 minutes after her, looking flustered. "Hells, so sorry. I was on a call with a potential client. It could be huge." This was his standard excuse for everything. The potential client was a mythical creature that was always on the verge of giving him a life-changing contract, but never actually materialized. "Happy birthday," he said, giving me a quick, awkward side hug before sitting down. Laura finally looked up from her phone. "Oh, right, happy birthday." It was delivered with the same enthusiasm as someone commenting on the weather. The optimistic flicker inside me dimmed. The dinner proceeded as it always did, as a business meeting where I was the client to be pitched. Noah launched into a long monologue about his vision for a new branding project he was designing for himself. It required a new, top-of-the-line tablet with a special stylus, and he'd found the perfect one for just under $2,000. He wasn't asking directly, but his detailed description of its features and how it would revolutionize his workflow was a thinly veiled proposal. Laura, in turn, talked endlessly about a trip her friends were planning to Greece. She gushed about the white sand beaches, the beautiful hotels, and the amazing photo opportunities. "I just don't know how I can swing it, though," she sighed dramatically, swirling her expensive wine in her glass, the second one I'd bought her. "It's so much money up front." The unspoken suggestion hung in the air between us. I just sat there, pushing my pasta around my plate, my appetite gone. I tried to steer the conversation, asking them about their lives in a way that didn't involve their financial needs. I asked Noah if he was seeing anyone. I asked Laura about her friends. Their answers were short and vague, their eyes constantly drifting back to their phones. It was painfully clear that they had no interest in a conversation that wasn't about them. The final straw came when the check arrived. I placed my credit card on the tray without a second thought. The waiter came to pick it up, and as he walked away, Laura leaned forward with a conspiratorial air. "So, Noah and I were talking the other day," she began, and for a moment I thought they were finally going to give me a real gift or share some happy news. I was wrong. "We've been thinking," Noah chimed in, picking up the thread. "You've been in that condo for a while now, and you've got a lot of equity built up. And your job is really stable." I looked between them, confused. "Okay, and?" "Well," Laura said, choosing her words carefully, "we think it's time you helped us get set up for real. I want to put a down payment on a condo in the city, and Noah needs to invest in a real home studio for his business. It's the next logical step." Noah nodded eagerly. "Exactly. We've been running the numbers. If you co-sign on our loans and help us with the down payments, we could finally get our lives started properly. It's the kind of thing a parent would do." I stared at them, my wine glass frozen halfway to my lips. It wasn't just the audacity of the request, it was the cold, calculating way they presented it. It wasn't a favor they were asking for, it was a business plan they expected me to execute. The final phase of the project that was my life's work, setting them up for good. I finally found my voice. It came out quiet and strained. "A parent, I'm your sister, and I've been helping you your entire lives. I've given you everything I have. My savings account is practically empty every month because of your businesses and lifestyles." Laura scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Oh, don't be so dramatic. It's not like you have anyone else to spend your money on. You don't have a husband or kids. What else are you going to do with it?" The cruelty of that statement struck me like a physical blow. She had taken my biggest sacrifice, the family and life I'd never had a chance to build for myself, and turned it into a weapon, using it as a justification for their endless demands. "That's not the point," I said, my voice shaking with a mixture of anger and hurt. "The point is that you can't just expect me to finance your entire lives. You're adults. You need to be independent." Noah leaned back, crossing his arms with a look of pure condescension. "You know, this is really disappointing. We thought you'd be happy for us, that you'd want to support us." And then Laura delivered the final, fatal line. She looked me straight in the eye, her expression cold and dismissive. "Honestly, if you're not going to help us with this, then what's the point of you? We're moving on with our lives. It feels like you're nothing to us anymore beyond a bank account. And if that's closed, well..." She let the sentence hang in the air, but the meaning was crystal clear. Nothing. After 20 years of sacrifice, of putting their needs before my own every single day, that's what I was to them. Nothing. I sat there in stunned silence as they gathered their things, complaining about how I had ruined my own birthday dinner. They walked out of the restaurant without a backward glance. I was left alone at the table, surrounded by the remnants of a celebration that had turned into an execution. The shock was a cold, heavy blanket, but underneath it, a tiny, unfamiliar ember of rage began to glow. And in that moment, I made a new plan. My project wasn't over. It was just entering a new, final phase, liquidation. I drove home from the restaurant in a daze. The city lights blurred through my tear-filled eyes, each one a mocking reminder of the vibrant life I had never allowed myself to live. When I got back to my condo, the silence was deafening. For years, I had hated the quiet, filling it with calls to check on Noah or texts to see what Laura needed. Tonight, it felt different. It felt like an opportunity. Laura's words echoed in my head. "You're nothing to us anymore beyond a bank account." It was the cruelest thing anyone had ever said to me, but as the initial pain began to subside, it was replaced by a chilling clarity. She was right. That's all I had become. I wasn't their sister, I was their provider. Our entire relationship was transactional, and I had been too blind, too buried in my sense of duty to see it. The first person I called was Rachel. I recounted the entire dinner, my voice cracking as I repeated Laura's final words. She listened patiently, without interruption, as a good friend and a good therapist does. "Oh, Helen," she said softly when I finished. "I'm so sorry. That is unbelievably painful to hear, but I want you to listen to me very carefully. This is not the end. This is a gift." "A gift?" I asked, incredulous. "It feels like a death sentence." "No," she insisted, her voice firm. "They've given you the truth. They've finally said out loud what their actions have been showing for years. They've released you from your obligation. You don't have to pretend anymore. You are free." Free? The word sounded foreign, like a language I didn't speak. For 20 years, my identity had been interwoven with theirs. Helen, the responsible one. Helen, the caregiver. Helen, the one who would always be there to pick up the pieces. Who was I without them? The next morning, I woke up with a strange sense of purpose. The grief was still there, a heavy weight in my chest, but the rage from the night before had solidified into a cold, hard resolve. They had declared me nothing. Fine, I would show them what nothing looked like. Nothing from me ever again. My first step was to change my phone number. It was a simple act, but it felt monumental. For 2 decades, my phone had been a lifeline for them, a direct portal for their endless stream of requests and crises. With a 15-minute visit to my mobile provider, that portal was sealed shut. I gave the new number only to Rachel and my work. Next, I went to my bank. I sat down with a personal banker and systematically dismantled the financial scaffolding that had been supporting my siblings. I had a joint savings account with Laura, one I'd set up years ago to help her learn to save. In reality, I was the only one who ever deposited money into it, and she was the only one who withdrew from it. I closed it, transferring the meager balance of $27.14 into my own account. I imagined her shock the next time she tried to use that debit card for an overpriced latte. Then I addressed the credit card, the one Laura used for her shopping sprees and fancy dinners. I called the company and reported the supplementary card as lost, effective immediately. I asked them to issue a new primary card for myself with a new number. The customer service agent was polite and efficient, unaware that she was helping me perform major surgery on my life. I went home and logged into my online banking. My screen was a roadmap of my servitude, the recurring e-transfer to Noah for his rent subsidy, the automatic bill payment for Laura's phone plan, which was bundled with mine, the payments for their streaming services, their car insurance, their everything. One by one, I clicked cancel. With each click, I felt a weight lift. Cancel, cancel, cancel. It was a declaration of independence. The hardest part was the emotional untangling. I walked through my condo and saw their ghosts everywhere. The expensive espresso machine on my counter, a birthday gift for Noah last year. The framed photos on my bookshelf, all of them with their smiling, ungrateful faces. I took down every single picture of them. I boxed up the espresso machine and put it in my storage locker. I was cleansing my space, performing an exorcism of their presence. During this process, I stumbled upon a box in the back of my closet labeled Family Papers. Inside were old report cards, childhood drawings, and stacks of financial documents. And then I found it, a thick folder containing the final statements from my father's estate. I remembered being so overwhelmed at the time, just signing where the lawyer told me to sign, trying to keep everything afloat. Curiosity piqued. I sat down and started reading through them properly for the first time. My father's life insurance policy had been for $50,000. It wasn't a fortune, but it wasn't insignificant either. After the funeral expenses and the last of the mortgage were paid, there had been about $15,000 left over. The lawyer had advised me to put it into a trust for Noah and Laura for when they turned 21. I remembered nodding in agreement, thinking it was the right thing to do. It was their inheritance, however small. But as I looked closer at the documents, I realized something. I had been named the sole executor and trustee. The trust documents were standard, giving me broad discretion to manage the funds for their well-being and education. I had given them their shares when they turned 21, of course, but seeing it on paper, seeing that small nest egg my father had left, I had a sudden, stark realization. That $15,000 was a drop in the ocean compared to what I had personally given them over the years. Their real inheritance hadn't come from our father. It had come from my salary, my time, and my life. And they had squandered it all, then had the nerve to demand more. A new idea began to form in my mind, an idea sparked by that folder of old papers. They thought I was just a bank. They thought their demands for my condo equity were reasonable. They had no idea what their lives had actually cost me. It was time for a full and complete financial audit. It was time to show them the real balance sheet of their dependents. My revenge wouldn't be loud or explosive. It would be quiet, meticulous, and devastatingly precise. It would be a project plan. And I was the best project manager I knew. With the decision made, I channeled all the skills from my career into this new, personal project. The objective was simple: to calculate the exact monetary value of my investment in my siblings since I became their sole provider at age 23. The project kickoff meeting was just me and a bottle of wine, sitting at my dining room table, which I had converted into a war room. I bought a fresh ledger, new pens, and a powerful calculator. This was no longer about emotion, it was about data. My first task was to gather every piece of financial information I could find. I was meticulous about record keeping, a habit born from years of managing tight budgets. I pulled out old cardboard boxes from my storage locker, filled with years of bank statements, credit card bills, and tax returns. The dust made me sneeze, but the contents made my blood run cold. It was a paper trail of my own subjugation. I decided to break it down into categories to make it manageable. The first category was housing. For the 7 years Noah lived with me after our father died, and the 11 years Laura did, they paid nothing. I calculated the average rent for a room in our area for those years, a conservative estimate. I multiplied it by the months they lived there, rent-free. The number was already staggering. I wrote it down in the ledger, my hand steady. This wasn't about anger anymore. It was about accounting. Then came Noah's subsidized rent for his own apartment. I had all the e-transfer receipts saved in my email. For 8 years, I had sent him between $400 and $600 a month. I created a spreadsheet, entering each payment meticulously. The total made me feel nauseous. I added it to the ledger. The next category was education. I had paid for both of their college application fees. I covered the costs of Laura's textbooks for her 2-year diploma in fashion marketing, a degree she now used to fold expensive sweaters. I paid for Noah's series of knee graphic design courses and certifications, each one promising to be the one that would finally launch his career. I had the receipts for all of it. Then I tackled the most complex category: lifestyle and business support. This was the catch-all for the thousands of transactions that had bled my accounts dry. I went through over a decade of credit card statements, line by line. Every statement was a story. There was Laura's section, a litany of charges from clothing stores, brunch spots, nail salons, and travel websites. The designer handbag for the wedding. The plane tickets for her getaway with friends. The endless stream of small charges from coffee shops and lunch places that added up to a fortune over time. I highlighted each one, my marker a weapon of truth. And then there was Noah's section. Payments to music stores for guitars and amplifiers, charges for studio recording time, the new laptop, the expensive software subscriptions, the emergency money for a car repair, the money to cover a bounced check. It was a relentless cascade of financial irresponsibility, all of it underwritten by me. For 2 solid weeks, I spent every evening and the entire weekend on this task. My apartment was covered in spreadsheets and stacks of paper. I cross-referenced everything. I double-checked my math. Rachel would call to check in, her voice a lifeline of sanity. "How are you holding up?" she'd ask. "I'm angry," I admitted one night, staring at a year's worth of statements that showed I had spent more on Laura's social life than on my own mortgage. But it's a clean anger. It feels productive. Every number I write down feels like I'm taking back a piece of my own story. "That's good," she said. You're not just seeing the transactions anymore, you're seeing the pattern. You're validating your own feelings with cold, hard facts. She was right. The numbers told a story that my heart had tried to deny for years. A story of one-sided sacrifice and boundless entitlement. They hadn't just been asking for help, they had been systematically draining the life out of me, one small transaction at a time. The sheer scale of it was breathtaking. It was far more than I had ever imagined. As I neared the end of my audit, I created a final summary spreadsheet. I had columns for each sibling and rows for each category: housing, education, bills, phone, car insurance, lifestyle, and direct cash transfers. I entered the final totals for each. Then, I added one last calculation. Using a standard investment calculator, I inputted the total amount for each of them. I set the time frame to the number of years I had been supporting them. And I calculated the opportunity cost, what that money would have become if I had invested it in a simple, low-risk index fund with an average annual return of 7%. This was the number that truly broke me. It was a fortune. It was the down payment on a bigger house. It was a comfortable retirement. It was a life of travel and freedom. It was the life I had given away. I printed out that final summary, the ink stark against the white paper. The grand total was there, at the bottom of the page, a 7-figure number representing the full cost of my self-neglect. I stared at that number for a long time, the hum of the printer the only sound in the room. There was no triumph, just a profound, hollow sadness. This was the price of their ingratitude, but it was also the price of my own blindness. I had allowed it to happen. But I wasn't that person anymore. The woman who wrote those checks and ignored her own needs was gone. She had died in that Italian restaurant. The woman sitting here now, the one with the spreadsheets and the ledger, was different. She was a project manager, and her project was in its final stages. She had gathered the data. She had analyzed the results. Now, it was time to prepare the final presentation. It was time to build my severance package. With the audit complete, the next phase of my project began, crafting the delivery mechanism for my findings. This wouldn't be a screaming match or a tearful confrontation. It would be a corporate-style offboarding. My siblings had treated me like a business, so I would treat them like underperforming assets being liquidated. My weapon of choice would not be anger, but professionalism. My first step was to formalize everything. I contacted a lawyer Rachel recommended, a sharp woman named Ms. Albright who specialized in estate and financial disputes. I booked a consultation and walked into her office with my ledger and a binder containing my summary spreadsheets and key supporting documents. I laid out the story not as a wounded sister, but as a manager presenting a case study. I explained my 20 years of financial support, the birthday dinner ultimatum, and the detailed audit I had just completed. I concluded by showing her the final number, the total amount I had spent, plus the calculated investment loss. Ms. A. Albright listened intently, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and looked at me over her steepled fingers. "Well, Ms. Vance," she said, a hint of admiration in her voice. "This is the most thoroughly documented case of familial financial drain I have ever seen. You've done 90% of my job for me." "So what's the next step?" I asked. "Legally, can I do anything?" "Realistically, clawing back 2 decades of informal support is nearly impossible," she explained. "We could try, but it would be a long, ugly, and expensive court battle with no guarantee of success. However," she leaned forward, a glint in her eye, "what we can do is create a powerful deterrent against any future claims they might dream up. We can formalize your separation from them in a way that is legally airtight and sends an unequivocal message." This was exactly what I wanted. I didn't want their money back. I knew that was gone. I wanted my future back. I wanted freedom. Over the next week, Ms. Albright and I drafted 2 identical documents. They were titled Statement of Financial Independence and Final Accounting. It was a masterpiece of cold, legal prose. The document began by stating that as of the date of my 38th birthday, all financial, emotional, and logistical support from me, Helen Vance, to the recipient was permanently terminated. The core of the document was a summary of my audit. It didn't use emotional language, it used accounting terms. It listed, in clear, itemized fashion, the financial contributions made by me over the past 15 years, broken down by category: housing, education, transportation, business seed funding, and personal expense coverage. It presented the cold, hard total for each sibling. The final page was the masterstroke. It included the opportunity cost analysis, showing what their support package would be worth if it had been invested in the market. It concluded with a legally binding declaration. By signing the document, they would be acknowledging the receipt of this final accounting. More importantly, the signature block was part of a waiver. By signing, they would forever waive any and all future claims, financial, inheritance, or otherwise, against me or my estate. It essentially disinherited them, not out of spite, but as a logical conclusion to the financial statement. They had already received their inheritance many times over. Ms. Albright also included a cover letter, written on her firm's letterhead. It explained that I was restructuring my financial affairs and required their signature on the enclosed document to formalize the conclusion of our past financial arrangements. It was polite, professional, and utterly terrifying. While Ms. Albright was finalizing the documents, I was making my own preparations. The most significant was putting my condo up for sale. It was a beautiful place, but it was haunted by memories of their dependents. It was the headquarters of my old life, and I needed to move on. I found a real estate agent, and within 2 weeks, accepted an offer that was well over my asking price. The closing date was in 45 days. I arranged to move my things into storage and rent a small, furnished apartment for a few months while I decided where I wanted to live next. For the first time, my future was a blank page. I also booked a trip, a real one, 3 weeks in New Zealand, a place I had always dreamed of visiting. I paid for the entire thing up front with the first bit of money I'd saved since cutting them off. The confirmation email in my inbox felt more valuable than gold. Finally, the severance packages were ready. I had 2 pristine, bound copies, each in a crisp manila envelope with my lawyer's return address. I didn't trust myself to deliver them in person. I needed this to be clean and impersonal. I hired a professional courier service to deliver them simultaneously to Noah's apartment and Laura's workplace. I requested signature confirmation for both. As I watched the courier leave with the envelopes, a sense of calm washed over me. The project plan was executed. All deliverables were on track. There was nothing left to do but wait for the inevitable fallout. I knew the silence wouldn't last much longer. The phone I'd bought on a new, separate plan was about to get very, very busy. But this time, they wouldn't have the number. They would have to go through my lawyer. The firewall was up. The system was secure. The signatures on the delivery confirmations came through to my email less than 2 hours after the courier picked up the packages. Laura signed for hers at 11:42 a.m. at the front desk of the boutique. Noah signed for his at 12:10 p.m. at his apartment. I imagined them opening the envelopes, their curiosity turning to confusion as they saw the legal letterhead, and then to dawning horror as they read the contents. The countdown had begun. It took less than an hour for the first explosion. It came not as a call to me, but as a frantic email to Ms. Albright's office, which was immediately forwarded to me. It was from Laura. The email was a chaotic mess of typos and frantic, all-caps sentences. "This is insane," she wrote. "What is this document? Helen can't do this. She can't just cut us off. We are her family. This is some kind of sick joke. I need to speak to her immediately. Tell her to call me. This is a horrible misunderstanding." Ms. Albright's paralegal sent back a polite, pre-written response stating that all communication must be in writing for the time being, and that Ms. Vance considered the enclosed document to be self-explanatory. Noah's reaction came a few hours later. His email was different. It tried to take a tone of wounded reason, the classic manipulation tactic he'd used on me for years. Dear Ms. Albright, it began, I am writing in response to the deeply concerning and hurtful package I received today. It seems my sister, Helen, is going through some sort of personal crisis, and I am very worried about her. These numbers are wildly inflated and taken completely out of context. The financial help she provided was always understood to be a gift given out of familial love. To reframe it as some kind of corporate ledger is frankly insulting. My sister is a generous person, and this legalistic approach is not like her at all. I suspect she is under some kind of duress or bad influence. Please convey to her that her family loves her and we just want to talk this through. My lawyer and I had anticipated this. My response, sent via her office, was simple. The numbers are not inflated. They are taken directly from financial statements, copies of which are available upon request. Helen is not under duress. She is, for the first time, acting in her own best interest. The terms are not negotiable. The next move they made was to try and get around the firewall. They started emailing my work address. The first few were blocked by the company's spam filter. Then one from Noah got through. Helen, I know you're reading this. You can't just hide behind a lawyer. Pick up the phone. You are destroying our family. I created a rule to send any email from their addresses directly to a folder I named Archive, unread. When email didn't work, they escalated. They showed up at my office. The receptionist, a wonderful woman named Carol, had been pre-briefed by me. I had simply told her I was dealing with a difficult family matter and that if two specific individuals arrived, she was to inform them that I was unavailable and that they needed to leave the premises. Carol called me on my internal line. Helen, your brother and sister are here. They are insistent. Are they being aggressive? I asked, my heart pounding. A little, she admitted. They keep saying it's a family emergency. Please call security, Carol, and thank you. I owe you lunch for the next month. Having them escorted out of my workplace by security was a new low, even for them. It was also a new high for me. It was the first time I had ever put a physical boundary between us. The final, desperate act was showing up at my condo. I saw them from my window, standing on the sidewalk, looking up at my unit. Laura was crying, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. Noah had his hands on his hips, pacing back and forth, looking furious. They buzzed my apartment. I didn't answer. They tried calling the building manager. He had also been informed and refused them entry. They stood out there for nearly an hour before finally giving up and leaving. Watching them retreat, for the first time I felt nothing. No guilt, no sadness, just a quiet, peaceful emptiness. A week later, a single, crisp envelope arrived at Ms. Albright's office. It contained both of the signed and notarized statements of financial independence. There was no note, no last-ditch appeal, just their signatures scrawled on the final page. I suspect they had consulted a lawyer of their own who had told them the hard truth. They had no case. My gifts were in the past, and they had no legal claim on my future. Signing the document was their only move, a reluctant acknowledgement of their defeat. The signed papers were the official end. It was the final withdrawal from the Bank of Helen. The accounts were closed, the books were balanced. I now had in my possession a legally binding document that guaranteed my freedom. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I ordered takeout from my favorite Thai restaurant, opened a nice bottle of Sauvignon Blanc, and sat on my balcony, watching the sunset. My phone didn't ring. No one texted me asking for money. There were no impending crises to solve, no emotional fires to put out. There was only silence. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. My life was finally my own. The sale of my condo was closing in a few weeks, and my flight to New Zealand was booked. The project of raising my siblings was officially complete. It had ended wildly over budget and decades behind schedule, but it was, at long last, done. The months that followed the signing of the documents were a renaissance. The sale of my condo closed without a hitch. Standing in the empty rooms before handing over the keys, I felt a profound sense of release. This place was no longer a home. It was a monument to a life of servitude, and I was happy to let it go. With the proceeds of the sale in my bank account, coupled with the money I was no longer hemorrhaging on my siblings, I was financially healthier than I had ever been in my life. My trip to New Zealand was transformative. For 3 weeks, I was completely anonymous. I was not a sister, a caregiver, or a project manager. I was just Helen. I hiked on glaciers, kayaked in crystal-clear fjords, and met travelers from all over the world. I took thousands of pictures, not for a social media feed, but for myself. In a quiet moment, looking out over the stunning landscape of Milford Sound, I realized I was genuinely happy. It was a feeling so unfamiliar that it took me a moment to identify it. It wasn't the frantic, temporary relief of solving one of my siblings' problems. It was a deep, steady, and quiet contentment. When I returned, I didn't rush to buy a new property. I continued to rent, enjoying the freedom of not being tied down. I reconnected with old friends I had neglected for years, apologizing for my absence and explaining, as much as I was comfortable with, that I was in a new chapter of my life. They welcomed me back with open arms. "Rachel remained my rock. I've never seen you so light," she commented one day as we sat in a park. "You used to carry the weight of the world on your shoulders. Now you're just here." "I am," I smiled. "I finally feel present in my own life." I made a conscious effort to invest in myself, the same way I had once invested in my siblings. I took a pottery class. I started learning Italian. I joined a hiking club and spent my weekends exploring the trails outside the city. I was building a life, not for anyone else, but for me. The interests, hobbies, and dreams I had deferred for 20 years were finally being nurtured. About 6 months after the final withdrawal, I got a call from a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. She was a notorious family gossip, so I knew the call was not just to catch up. "Helen, I just have to ask," she said, dispensing with pleasantries. "What on earth happened with you and Laura and Noah?" "We've gone our separate ways," I said calmly, offering no details. "Well, that's one way to put it," she huffed. "Laura had to move into a tiny studio apartment with 2 roommates. She's working a second job on weekends. And Noah, well, Noah had to give up his apartment. He's sleeping on a friend's couch, trying to find a full-time job. He says you abandoned them." A year ago, this news would have sent me into a spiral of guilt. I would have blamed myself, rushed to fix it, and put them back on the financial footing they felt they deserved. But now, I felt a calm detachment. "They are adults," I said simply. "They are capable of managing their own lives. It sounds like that's what they're finally starting to do." My cousin was silent for a moment, clearly not getting the dramatic reaction she'd hoped for. She mumbled a goodbye, and I hung up the phone. It was not my problem anymore. Their struggles were the natural consequences of the choices they had made. They were finally learning the lessons I had shielded them from their entire lives: that actions have consequences, that lifestyles have costs, and that you cannot build a future on someone else's sacrifice. My life now is unrecognizable from what it was. I eventually bought a small house in a town an hour outside the city, a place with a garden and a guest room that I fill with friends, not resentful family members. I was promoted at work to director of operations, a role I earned because my mind was finally clear and focused. I even started dating someone, a kind architect who is fascinated by my story, but is more interested in building a future with me than dwelling on the past. I don't hate my siblings. In a strange way, I'm grateful to them. Their greed and cruelty gave me a gift I would have never given myself: the permission to choose my own life. They define me as nothing more than a bank account, and in doing so, they allowed me to become everything else. My grand reopening has been a resounding success, and this time I'm the only shareholder. And the profits, a life filled with peace, joy, and self-respect, are all mine.